When the original Volkswagen GTI was introduced in the 1980s, it was a huge success for Volkswagen. So it only makes sense that they would give the same hot hatch treatment to their most popular sedan, the Jetta, thus creating the Jetta GLI. Now, while various generations of the Jetta GLI have come and gone, none have been quite like this. This is the 2020 Volkswagen Jetta GLI Autobahn, and it shares the same engine, transmission, and chassis as the Golf GTI. So this should be pretty good to drive, and we're gonna check it out. But first, make sure you like the video and subscribe to our channel. So now we're behind the wheel of the 2020 Volkswagen Jetta GLI Autobahn, and first up, let's talk about what could be the most important thing about this car, that being directly in front of us and under the hood, because that is the exact same 2-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder you get in the Volkswagen GTI, also producing just over 220 horsepower in this application, which is more than enough for this car to feel pretty quick. Aside from the engine, the borrowing from the GTI doesn't stop there, because we have the same 6-speed manual transmission you'll find in the hot hatch. And more than anything, the overall structure of this car is identical to the GTI, something that's different to past GLI versions, which were sort of Jettas with bigger engines, whereas this is as close to the GTI as you can get in a sedan format. As a result of all that part sharing, the Jetta GLI makes a fantastic daily driver. The shifts themselves on this transmission are super smooth. The throw in between shifts is very long, meaning it's very forgiving. So if this was going to be your first car, or you're planning to learn how to drive stick shift in this car, it's no problem at all. And while yes, the automatic might be better suited for traffic settings, you won't be upset if you get the manual. It's really not hard to operate at all. So let's talk about how the transmission itself interacts with the engine, because it has some very long gears. And as a result of those long gears, you're basically going to be going very fast before you get into 3rd or 4th gear if you're absolutely flat out. Kind of maybe reducing the enjoyment of the car a little bit, but it gives you that back in fuel economy. Remember, this is the daily driver, so it has to be fun, but also has to be reasonable and economical for someone to drive on a daily basis. The engine itself, well, there's not much going on under 3,000 RPM. You can basically floor it, and what you're gonna get is a bunch of turbo lag. But as soon as 3,000 RPM hits, that's when it picks up. So let me show you. You can go down a bit, you're just at 3,000, you floor it, nothing, and then it picks up, and now we're moving along. But it definitely has a little bit of that lag, and you can definitely tell that this is a small engine with a decent sized turbo that takes a moment to spool up before it gives you all the goods, so to speak. So I'm not sure if I'm a little crazy here, but this car feels a little stiffer than the GTI. I've driven plenty of GTIs over the years, and I remember them being a little more comfortable than this. Now, I don't know if that has to do with additional firmness needed because it's a sedan, or it's heavier, or a longer wheelbase, but it definitely doesn't feel quite as comfortable as the GTI, but it's not that it's uncomfortable in any way, don't get me wrong, it's just a little firmer than the hatchback equivalent. So let's talk about this car being a sedan, because there are some drawbacks with that, namely being weight. This car can be up to 100 pounds heavier than the equivalent GTI, and you definitely feel that. This car doesn't feel quite as sharp as the GTI does, or as lively, let's say, but that kind of plays to its strengths, because this doesn't come across as a hot sedan, or a sort of a typical hot hatch equivalent. It comes off more as a very refined but kind of quick mini sedan. Think of it like a baby Audi S4. That's kind of the best way that I can sort of think about this car. Now, all of this comes at a price. Specifically, in this top trim level, we're looking at around $31,000. Now, keep in mind, this is the Autobahn, so you do get pretty much all the bells and whistles. If you look around me in the cabin, everything here is black leather with red stitching, much like in the GTI. This steering wheel in front of me is directly from the GTI itself. Everything seems to be pretty well screwed together. There's no weird noises, no weird rattles, kind of what you'd expect if you're paying at this price level for a car from Volkswagen. In front of me, I have a digital dash, which is configurable to show you all kinds of information if you want it. The good thing about it is that it has a very clean design. It's not too crowded, and it doesn't just throw useless information at you. It tells you just enough of what you need to know in a concise way that isn't distracting from the driving experience. The minimalism carries over to the infotainment, where its layout uses apps, much like you'd find on a phone, which I think is great because it makes it so anybody, even if they're not super keen on the newest infotainment systems, can get along with it really, really well. And let's not forget, we still have Apple CarPlay and Android Auto on board, meaning even if you don't like the infotainment system, you can swap it out. Although I urge you not to, because the theme of everything here is tied in so well. The infotainment itself is black and red, just like the dash, just like the stitching everywhere, and it's all very, very cohesive. Now, just because it's cohesive doesn't mean it's not a little bit boring. I mean, everything in here is just dark, and it's kind of like the cabin itself doesn't have that many textures or that many different colors. It's very, very dark in here, and it's all covered in plastic. So it doesn't give the most sort of upscale look, but it works just fine, especially for what you're paying. So let's talk about these seats, because these are not the bucket seats you get in the GTI. Those have a little bit more side bolstering, and I find them to be a little bit more comfortable. If I had to say, these seats look like the standard Jetta seats with some black perforated leather and red stitching on the sides, which is not to say that they're uncomfortable, but they're definitely not sporty like what you'd get from a GTI. This being a GLI Autobahn, you get a couple goodies in terms of performance, namely being the limited slip differential up front, the larger brakes, which are great if you ask me, but you won't really notice them in real world situations. Now, if this was a car that you wanted to take to some sort of autocross event or something like that, then absolutely opt for the performance bits. It's absolutely worth it. So let's move on to what could be probably my least favorite thing about the GLI, and that being its styling. Now, don't get me wrong, it's by no means an ugly car, but for some reason it just doesn't really give me the same level of excitement that looking at the GTI does. That has more of a timeless shape, and it looks really, really well put together, whereas this, for some reason, it just doesn't gel with me. I don't immediately fall in love with it, even though I love the color. This gray is very, very nice looking, and the red stripe in the front is obviously comes directly from the GTI, and I love it there and I love it here. But for some reason, as a package, I just can't seem to fall in love with it like I do the GTI. As you can see, there's a lot to like here, and the 2020 Jetta GLI does a good job of stacking up to its hatchback counterpart. Although it does so in a more relaxed demeanor, that's not necessarily a bad thing. All the good bits of the GTI are still here. Remember, the engine and transmission are the same and have the same power output, which is really what you want. But this leans more towards being a family sedan. If you were to think about it in the Audi space, imagine this then as a mini S4. Yes, it's quick, yes, it's capable, but above all else, it's refined and comfortable. And that's probably the best thing that this car could do. It's not trying to be the GTI, it's sort of carving its own lane, and it does so very well.